August 7, 1942, in the pitch black. Silence before dawn, the first wave of Marines step into the unknown. They thought they were carrying the same weapons every soldier knew: rifles, bayonets, machine guns, but hidden among them was something the Japanese had never imagined: a hunting gun reforged into a nightmare. When it roared, entire squads collapsed in seconds. Tonight, we're pulling back the jungle curtain on how the trench gun shattered Doctrine, rewrote close combat, and terrified anyone who faced it. And trust me, the story only gets darker from here. So if you're ready for the brutal truth of how a simple shotgun humbled an empire, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss what comes next. The Winchester Model 12 was never supposed to be a battlefield legend. It was born in the quiet rhythms of American life, a pump-action shotgun built for bird hunters, farmers, and men who prized reliability above all else. Before the war, you might have found it leaning in a barn corner or resting across the lap of a hunter waiting. The tall grass, simple, rugged, and efficient, it didn't have the prestige of a Springfield rifle or the intimidating reputation of a Browning machine gun, but in the crucible of modern war, simplicity often hides a terrible potential. The Model 12's pump-action mechanism allowed it to fire as fast as a soldier could cycle it. Each shell carried 933 caliber pellets, and when fired in quick succession, single Marine could unleash a storm of lead that no bolt-action rifle in the world could rival at close range. Weapon had already earned a controversial reputation in the First World War. In the trenches of France, American doughboys carried shortened versions of the Model 97 and Model 12, devastating German soldiers in close assaults. The destruction was so complete that Germany formally protested their use, calling them inhumane and a violation of the Hague Conventions. Their demand that captured Americans with shotguns should be executed on the spot. The U.S. replied coldly, if that ever happened, America would retaliate in kind. No American was ever executed, and the shotgun stayed in service. That moment decades earlier set the stage for what would come in the Pacific. By 1942, as Marines prepared to invade Guadalcanal, the Model 12 had been refined into a trench gun built for combat. Its barrel was cut to 20 in for maneuverability in tight spaces. Perforated heat shield prevented burns during prolonged fire. A bayonet lug allowed it to mount the fearsome 17 in M1917 blade, making it not just a firearm but a weapon of intimidation. And then there was its most feared feature: slam fire. A Marine could hold down the trigger and simply pump the action, firing with each forward thrust of the hand. The effect was terrifying, a near continuous roar of destruction as shells emptied in seconds. This was the weapon American commanders slipped quietly into the hands of select Marines, a tool not for long-range duels but for the chaos of jungle fighting, night ambushes, and close quarters encounters that defied traditional doctrine. The Japanese expected rifles and bayonets. Instead, they would face a weapon designed to annihilate anything within 20 yards, and the first time it was unleashed on Guadalcanal, they realized too late that the old rules of war no longer applied. Guadalcanal was not just a battle, it was a brutal laboratory. Tactics collided with reality. Japanese military doctrine held fast to the idea that Americans were weak in close combat, dependent on heavy artillery and long-range fire. In the dark, the Japanese believed their discipline, their courage, and their training with the bayonet would give them the edge. Night belonged to them, or so they thought. Infiltration squads crept through the jungle, moving silently through the vines, crawling across riverbeds, and slipping between American positions with daggers and grenades. To them, the shadows were a weapon, but when Marines armed with shotguns stood guard, the jungle turned against the infiltrators. Imagine a moonless night, a perimeter held by exhausted men who could barely see beyond an arm's length. A Japanese soldier inches forward, convinced he will plunge his bayonet into a sleeping enemy. Then, without warning, a metallic cha-chung splits the silence, the sound of a pump cycling Before he can react, 9 pellets of buckshot tear through the blackness, cutting down not just him but anyone unlucky enough to be beside him, for they first-time Japanese night fighters faced a weapon that nullified their advantage. The psychological effect was as devastating as the physical carnage. Survivors spoke of how the echo of a shotgun blast in the jungle seemed to come from everywhere at once. The weapon turned patrols into ambushes, sentries into predators, and perimeters into deadly traps. A Marine with a rifle might fire once and reveal his position. A Marine with a shotgun could fire again and again, spreading destruction across an entire arc of darkness. For Japanese soldiers trained to expect beyond bayonet combat, the shotgun felt unnatural, even dishonorable, a weapon that stripped away their spiritual advantage and replaced it with raw mechanical slaughter. Over time, Marines learned to exploit the fear. Shotgun were given to point men, the first to walk down narrow trails where ambush was almost certain. They were stationed at weak points in the line there, overlapping fields of fire, ensuring that no infiltrator could crawl through without being shredded. The weapon even became a tool of intimidation. In some units, Marines deliberately worked they pump loudly in the dark, knowing they sound alone could make Japanese patrols freeze, hesitate, or retreat. Guadalcanal taught both sides a grim lesson. For the Japanese, the doctrine of night infiltration was not invincible. For they Americans, the shotgun became more than just a weapon. It was a psychological hammer that shattered myths one blast at a time, and this was only the beginning. Soon the world would witness just how destructive the trench gun could be when unleashed against a full-scale assault. On the night of August 21, 1942, the Japanese tried to prove their doctrine in blood. Colonel Kanowo Ikiki, confident in the ferocity of his men, led nearly 1,000 soldiers across a narrow sandbar at the Tenaru River. It was the kind of attack their manuals glorified, a sudden nighttime thrust, bayonets fixed, morale sharpened by the belief that spiritual willpower would outmatch Western firepower. Ikiki's men expected a desperate defense, scattered rifle fire, and eventually hand-to-hand combat where their training would dominate. Instead, they ran headlong into a storm of steel machine guns, open first, cutting swaths across the sandbar. Artillery shells burst among the ranks, lighting up the night with deadly blossoms. But the real horror came when Japanese soldiers closed the distance and stumbled into the hidden positions of shotgun-armed Marines at ranges of 15 to 20 yards. The Winchester model revealed why it was so feared. Slam-firing Marines held triggers down, pumping furiously as blast after blast ripped through tightly packed attackers. Each shell spat 9.33 caliber pellets into the mass, cutting down multiple men with every squeeze of the action. Survivors later described the suddenness of the losses, whole files collapsing, seconds, bayonet-wielding men shredded before they ever reached American lines. The sound was unforgettable, a roaring, chaotic rhythm unlike rifles or machine guns, the rapid cycle of pumping metal, the hollow thud of buckshot striking flesh, and the eerie silences that followed each burst as another group of attackers went still. Marines who fought there recalled the sand turning black with bodies by dawn of the 916 Japanese soldiers who began the charge. Nearly 800 lay dead when the sun rose. The rest fled or committed ritual suicide. Colonel Ikiki himself reportedly burned his regimental colors before taking his own life. The lesson was brutal and undeniable. Japanese commanders had gambled on doctrine, courage, discipline, and shock tactics, but courage could not stop a hail of buckshot at point-blank range. The Tenaru River massacre proved that the shotgun wasn't just a supplemental weapon, it was a doctrine killer. It invalidated the Japanese assumption that the Americans could not fight in close quarters. Instead, it revealed that American adaptability paired with ruthless firepower could make every bayonet charge a suicide mission. The war in the Pacific would never be the same if Guadalcanal was the shotgun's proving ground. The battles that followed were its workshop. Marines often improvising under fire, invented new ways to exploit the Model 12's strengths. These innovations weren't handed down from ivory tower tacticians. In Washington, they came from exhausted men sweating in the jungle who needed an edge against an enemy that refused to quit. Every skirmish produced another trick, another adaptation, and the shotgun became not just a weapon but a toolbox of survival. One of the most ingenious tactics was skip shooting. In caves and bunkers, Marines realized they could bounce buckshot off stone walls, sending pellets ricocheting into angles they couldn't see. Instead of rushing blindly into an enemy's hiding spot, they turned the geometry of the cave into an ally. A blast fired at the right angle would scatter lead fragments around corners, shredding anyone who thought they were safe. Survivors described the sound of ricocheting pellets inside a confined space as unbearable, like being trapped inside a storm of screaming metal. Another adaptation was the use of mixed ammunition loads. Marines began alternating buckshot and slugs in their tubes. The first shot would spread, cutting through multiple targets. The second, a solid slug would punch through obstacles, wooden barriers, or even crude armor. This blend made the shotgun versatile, capable of shifting from ambush breaker to bunker buster in seconds. On patrol, point men often carried such mixed loads, ensuring they could respond to whatever threat the jungle spat out. Shotgun assault teams also emerged when bunkers or caves had to be cleared. Commanders often placed a shotgun man at the very front. Flamethrowers and demolition men followed behind, but it was the trench gunner who delivered the first thunderclap inside the darkness. Veterans later admitted it was one of the most dangerous jobs in the Pacific, stepping into the mouth of a cave with only a few feet separating you from an enemy desperate to survive. Yet time and again the shotgun proved decisive, blasting through the initial resistance and allowing the follow-up teams to finish the job. These tactics spread quickly. Marines shared tips in the field and word passed from unit to unit. What worked on New Georgia was used again on Bougainville. What succeeded in Saipan was refined on Ioma. By 1944, the shotgun was more than a tool of intimidation. It was part of a playbook, a collection of field-learned techniques that made American infantry more lethal. The environments the Japanese thought would favor them. The Model 12 was never the star of glossy recruiting posters, but in the damp, terrifying reality of Pacific combat, it was the difference between life and death. And the men who carried it knew they weren't just holding a gun, they were holding the key to rewriting how close-quarters combat was fought. By late 1943, the Pacific War was no longer about open battlefields. It had become a war of holes in the earth, caves, tunnels, and bunkers carved into coral, rock, and volcanic ash. For the Marines tasked with clearing these fortresses, every shadow might hold an enemy waiting with a grenade or bayonet. Rifles could not dominate these spaces. Grenades and flamethrowers were useful, but they lacked precision once the smoke cleared. The shotgun, however, thrived in this environment, and it earned a reputation that chilled both sides. When a Marine fired a Model 12 into the mouth of a cave, the effect was horrifying. Buckshot ricocheted off stone walls, tearing through anyone crouched inside. The confined acoustics amplified every shot, turning the sound into a physical force. Survivors said the echo wasn't just loud, it was disorienting, like being inside a collapsing building. Pellets screamed in every direction, embedding in walls, bouncing unpredictably, striking men who thought they were hidden in safety. For Japanese defenders who often fought to the death in these tunnels, the shotgun was a nightmare made real. Marines soon developed cave-clearing techniques that blended the shotgun with other brutal tools. The phrase blowtorch and corkscrew was coined on Tarawa and perfected on Uema and Okinawa. Flamethrowers blasted fire into entrances, filling them with heat and smoke. Demolition charges sealed chambers or collapsed openings, but it was often the trench gunner who went first, pumping shells into the darkness, breaking the last resistance before explosives finished the job. The combination left Japanese survivors shaken, some abandoned positions, entirely after the first volley, unable to withstand the psychological pressure of the echoing blasts in Okinawa's tunnels. Marines sometimes practiced skip shooting, deliberately firing shells at sharp angles to let the buckshot ricochet deeper inside. This meant they could kill men they could not see. For defenders, it created the sensation that death came from every direction. The terror wasn't just the wounds inflicted, but the certainty that there was no safe corner, no place untouched by the spread of pellets. Accounts from Marines described how after repeated assaults, they could sometimes break an enemy position without losing a man. Not because the Japanese surrendered, but because they simply could not endure the chaos within the caves, the sound, the smoke, the buckshot storms. It eroded courage as effectively as it destroyed flesh. In this way, the shotgun wasn't only a weapon of death, it was a weapon of fear, designed by circumstance and perfected in the crucible of battle. Given its lethal reputation, many wonder why the shotgun never became as widespread as the M1 Garand or the Browning automatic rifle. The answer lies in the cold math of wartime logistics. The Winchester Model 12 trench gun was devastating, but it was also a specialized weapon. Manufacturing it at scale was complicated. Its machining required precision, and production lines were already strained, producing millions of rifles, carbines, and machine guns. In total, only about 61,000 Model 12 trench guns were produced during the entire war, a drop in the ocean compared to the millions of Garands that rolled out of Springfield Armory. They were practical limitations too. The shotgun was heavier than a carbine when modified for combat, especially with its heat shield and bayonet lug. Its effective range was limited beyond 50 yards. The spread of buckshot lost much of its punch, making it unsuitable as a main battle weapon. In the open, Marines still needed rifles to return fire against Japanese Arisaka rifles and machine gun. The shotgun was a scalpel in a war where most soldiers carried hammers. Another factor was doctrine. U.S. commanders knew the weapon was invaluable for jungle fighting and night defense, but they also feared making close quarters combat the norm. Rifles and machine guns encouraged distance, shotguns encouraged proximity. And while the weapon gave Americans a terrifying advantage in caves and ambushes, generals worried that an overreliance on shotguns might lead to unnecessary casualties in fights that could be won with long-range firepower. Thus, the trench gun was distributed selectively to Marines on point, to Army assault teams, to Navy landing parties, and to airfield guards where close encounters were likely. What kept the shotgun in play despite these limitations was ammunition. Millions of shells were produced, more than enough to keep the men who had them supplied. Marines often carried mixed loads: buckshot for close fighting, slugs for longer punches, and even smaller shot for vegetation clearing. Its versatility made it worth the wait, especially for men who knew their mission would put them face to face with the enemy. Scarcity also shaped reputation. Model 12 was not a weapon everyone had. It was a weapon men remembered. Those who carried it swore by its effectiveness, telling stories of how single blast could end an ambush or hold a breach. Those who fought alongside shotgun-armed comrades often begged for one of their own. Its legend spread not through mass issue but through word of mouth, battle by battle. In the end, the shotgun became a paradox: too valuable to ignore, too specialized to mass produce. It remained a weapon of choice for the few, a nightmare for the enemy, and a reminder that sometimes the deadliest tools of war are not the ones most widely carried, but the ones used where they matter most. The Winchester Model 12 was more than a weapon, it was a cultural collision. Japanese doctrine exalted the bayonet and close quarter spirit, convinced Americans would crumble in face-to-face combat, but in the jungle their ritual met cold mechanics. Marines armed with trench guns didn't duel, they annihilated. Single blast at 20 yards erased entire files of attackers, leaving survivors stunned that courage alone could be so quickly shredded. What the Japanese saw As dishonor the Marines saw as survival. By 1944, that survival instinct had become doctrine. On Saipan, the largest Banzai charge of the war broke against walls of shotgun fire. Marines cutting swaths through charging ranks where machine guns couldn't hold. On Yuma and Okinawa, the shotgun became the spear point of blowtorch and core crew tactics fired into tunnels before flames and explosives sealed them shut. Skip shooting buckshot off cave walls created storms of ricochets that made defenders abandon positions without ever seeing their enemy. The sound alone, the metallic pump followed by thunder in the dark, became a weapon of fear. When the Pacific campaign ended, only 61,000 trench guns had been built. But their legend was outsized. Veterans swore by them, enemies remembered them. In terror, in Korea they patrolled frozen ridges, in Vietnam they cleared jungles and tunnels once more, and their philosophy, overwhelming close range firepower, lived on in every weapon system designed to dominate confined battlefields. For the Japanese who faced them, the Model 12 was proof that tradition could not outlast innovation. For the Marines who carried them, it was the ultimate equalizer, the weapon that turned the dark jungle into their domain.